We wish you a happy Sunday and say welcome to Moral Side of the News, our weekly discussion show. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me this week, another distinguished panel, Dr. Jamesetta Ferguson, St. Peter's United Church of Christ and MOLO Village CDC, Rabbi Stan Miles, Louisville Melton School, Reverend Daniel Corrie Shull, Burnett Avenue Baptist Church, and Father Tony Smith, Archdiocese of Louisville. We were all horrified by news from Buffalo, New York this week. 18-year-old Peyton Gendron reportedly gunned down 10 people, all of them Black, at a grocery store in Buffalo. Authorities call the massacre a racially motivated hate crime. The loss of life and the loss of access to the only grocery store in this particular neighborhood is more than words can describe. So we turn to our panel on Moral Side of the News. And panel, where do we start on this topic?
Well, first, I think offering condolences to those families, the families of the victims of this terrible tragedy. I think also we should extend condolences or maybe condemnation to our country that refuses to do anything about white domestic terrorists who continue to perpetuate these type of tragedies throughout our country. Everything from school shootings to going into the Mother Bethel AME Church in South Carolina to now this tragedy. It seems that we're not willing to deal with the racial hatred that is being stoked by the likes of Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro and the many others who continue to stir the hatreds and the animosities of particularly white males in the United States of America. And I think that should be roundly condemned. And I think that there should be some deep reflection nationally about why we won't speak to this tremendous and growing and fomenting white domestic terrorism that continues to plague the U.S., making grocery stores and church Bible studies and Jewish synagogues unsafe places to be.
This is an identical crime to what happened a couple of years ago at the Stony Brook Kroger in our own community. And yep. I, for one, believe that it involves the way we deal with people with mental illnesses and, of course, sensible gun control. I was talking about this with a group of people that I know, and I said, I have to place the blame on the late President Ronald Reagan, because during the Reagan administration, this is when all of the mental health facilities, mental hospitals were closed. Those programs were ended. And those people dealing with that kind of trauma in their lives, there wasn't any place for them to go. There wasn't anything for them to do. They're out on the streets. They're in our community. And we are reaping the harvest of a civilization unwilling to treat those people with the afflictions that they carry.
I would just say, Rabbi Miles, that I think we should be careful to equate what the young man did in Buffalo as mental illness with what he had written on his AR-15, his motivation to drive across state and city boundaries, his intentionality of finding a store in a Black community that was the only place to find food and to get medication in what is otherwise a food desert. I don't know that that's mental illness. And there's constantly this conflating of racial hostilities and animus with mental illness, particularly when it is a white male who perpetuates these types of atrocities. And so I think, yes, mental illness and the conversations concerning mental illness has a place, but this is white nationalist terrorism. And we have seen the increase of these type of actions from Charlottesville to Dylan Roof. And as you stated, the gentleman in Jeffersontown at the Stony Brook Krogers, we continue to see this type of white domestic terrorism that is being perpetuated. And I think we give it a pass by labeling it as mental illness and not really what it is, which is intentional racial hostilities. And from what has been reported, this young man in Buffalo has bought into the replacement theory, saying that Black people are out to replace our white brothers and sisters. And this has moved him to take this type of action. And so I'm just concerned about conflating the two.
I would, Corrie, my comment would be what you're saying. Yeah, I can see both yours and Stan's comments, but whether it's legally defined, psychologically defined, or just in common sense defined, I think even as you're mentioning racism, which is truly to the point, is a mental illness as well. Not only that, but it's a sin. It's a great immorality that's going on throughout this country. And I grant to you the predominant seems to be because of the white power structure as it was would be seen as, yes, but it's not endemic similar to the white race, but what we're seeing historically in a sense of what's happening now. Yes, you have a point. My comment would be, Stan brought up the whole thing of guns and whatever, and of course, being a firearm owner, whatever, I'm the first to say that I think it's time to re-examine the Second Amendment after it's been written so long. People keep hollering at the Second Amendment and bringing that up, and yes, legally, okay, fine. But Corrie, to your point, I think the initial point, I would bring this agenda to it or addenda to it. I think it's not just the Second Amendment that needs to be re-examined. I think it's the First Amendment. When you have these Tucker Carlson, all these other individuals who are stirring the pot, even presidents who stir the pot, whatever, I think the supposed right we have, it's not, none of the rights we have, none of the amendments are absolute, but the right to a free press, free assembly, et cetera, the right to social media. Again, if you listen to the comments coming forth, he, during the pandemic, was what's it called? Not, well, I guess racialized, but also
radicalized.
Radicalized. Yeah, I guess my tongue got in front of my eye teeth. I couldn't say what I was going to say. But the whole thing of this whole media routine. I mean, you cannot call, supposedly, you cannot shout fire in a confined area with people, but you can certainly go online and spill out this garbage about replacement theory and other theories of this nature, and there's no response to that. To Stan's point, I would just concur. Yes, the whole thing of mental illness or whatever, whether have you defined it this as racism as mental illness or not, but still, even other mental illness, we get to a point in this country where there's supposedly the freedoms are recognized, but not the responsibilities that come with those freedoms. And so I think we really need to re-examine from a modern perspective, a contemporary perspective, maybe not modern, of what all these amendments, what they really meant in the time that they were established, but also what they should mean now, could mean now, must mean now, in a sense of gun control, yes, but also in regards to what mental illness might be. But I'm talking too much, so.
Well, first I want to say that, to be honest, I'm angry. You know, I think that we try not to show our feelings when something like this happens. And I'm angry because of senseless violence being acted out in our communities. But the other thing that I am angry about is the only people that can deal with gun control, mental illness, this replacement theory, the white supremacist bigotry are white people. And for us to continue to ignore that fact that and believe that it's going to get better without white people dealing with this issue, dealing with this sin, it's not going to get any better. We can have all of the discussion about this, but until the people of power, in power, have that difficult conversation and begin to decide to make changes that are going to benefit the entire humanity, then it is not going to get any better.
You know, Reverend Ferguson, I would go as far as to argue that the people in power are already having the conversation and have decided that they would be decidedly racist. I think that the powers that be at Fox News, they know what they're doing. They understand what the hatred that type of sentiments create throughout the body politic, and they do it anyways. The Republican Party, the GOP, the party of anti-CRT, the party of anti-racism, the party of no affirmative action, the party of we are anti-abortion, but we're also anti-life. And that anti-life means anti-Black people. It's anti-gay and lesbian people. It's anti-anybody who is not a heteronormative Anglo-Saxon white person. They have decided that fanning the flames of racial hostilities is the way that they are going to move forward. And if they had not come to that conclusion, they would not elevate the type of political candidates they elevate. They would not be protesting school board meetings about CRT, which is not being taught in public schools, but maybe we ought to talk more about critical race theory because we certainly have a race problem. So I think that the decision has been made by the white power structures, the white powers that be, that they will, as best as they can, turn the clock back to some pre-1950s way of living that centers white normativity and decentralizes anything Black and anything of any other type of persuasion that can be seen as a replacement to the white way of life.
Corrie, I think I agree with you. When I hear snippets from Fox News, I don't watch it as a general rule, but I hear snippets praying that they're out of context, but I fear they're not. That is the equivalent to screaming fire in a crowded theater. That goes against the boundaries of the First Amendment. And when you mention going to a pre-1950s America, from my perspective, from a Jewish perspective, that's nothing more than a horror show. As horrible as that mid-century perspective was for the African-American community, it was also not the same. It can't be the same, but it was terribly, terribly debilitating for members of my community. Yeah. And I, for one, I to go in that direction is horrifying.
I think it's a
horrifying.
But when I look at the legislation, when I listen to the rhetoric, when I listen to these racial tropes that are being trotted out continuously, that is not just in opposition to Black people, but it is in opposition to Jewish people.
It's in opposition to the other, to anyone that you perceive as the other. If they're different from you in any way, then they are the other.
It's xenophobia. It is the fear of the other. And I think that it really has to be confronted head on, but I am not seeing enough people from all walks of life stand to oppose this type of vitriol that seems to become ubiquitous. Things that were just off limits when I was a child seem to be trotted out as a badge of honor now, and I think it's deeply upsetting, and it's sorely concerning.
I would suggest, again, we talked about the elections and all this good stuff going on, but in the way the country is set up as a quote, whether whoever's in control and power is in control and power, but as we saw this past presidential election, there's always an attempt there to orchestrate elections to go that way, Corrie, that you're talking about. But we have to get people out there to stand up for their rights and demand the voting rights and whatever. And to the ballot box is about the only way legally, I think, as this country is set up now, that we can begin to orchestrate a change in that direction. And again, to my point about your initial point, Corrie, the one who controls communication is really the one who has the power in this country. And they're the ones we have to, in some form or fashion, fight that in a sense of not only legally in the court system, but also bringing forth other venues that can address this issue and say, what you've heard there is not, it's the whole thing like Ukraine and whatever in regards to Russia. What the Russian people are hearing is not what the rest of the world is hearing. And we need to kind of, in some form or fashion, to do that same way within our own country. The issue, especially of racism, is horrible. Yes, it's sinful, very sinful.
I think one of the challenges, I think you're exactly right. But I think, the power structure is to blame, but far too many of our pulpits are silent about racism, about xenophobia, about homophobia in our communities. Far too many pulpits have sided with the alt-right. They have sided with this ultra-conservative line of thinking. And they have, moved from being prophetic or even being Christ-like to simply perpetuating a party line. The more videos that I see coming out of white evangelical churches, the more horrified I am, because the messaging mirrors nothing from the ministry of Jesus. Yet they believe that because they are a party who has certain moral, but they hold to certain moral or ethical values, that they are somehow more moral than other people who may not be like them. And they have bought into that hook, line, and sinker, and they are progressing some of the racial hatred, some of the racial animus that we're seeing in this country.
It has been said to me that what you're talking there, Corrie, that is simply the KKK redone, in the sense of they use religion as their version of religion to justify their own bigotry, whatever. And so that's what it's a rehash of that. We don't call it KKK, but it's the same type of quote, use the term, I shouldn't use the term, but quote, gospel that's being proclaimed out there, which is a false gospel. So
yeah.
Okay, panel, a good discussion to start our program, Moral Side of the News. We'll move on to our second topic now. Also topping headlines this week, Sweden and Finland push ahead with their bids to join NATO, despite opposition from Turkey. Russian President Vladimir Putin has demanded that NATO stop expanding toward Russia's borders. But British Prime Minister Boris Johnson welcomed Sweden and Finland, saying, quote, Putin's appalling ambitions have transformed the geopolitical contours of our continent, end quote. So panel, moral side of the news, are you watching what's going on with NATO closely?
Absolutely. And just think if 80 some odd years ago, the League of Nations would have taken that type of position against German expansionism in 1934-35, we may have avoided an entire Second World War. I think it's great. I also think it's a repudiation of our former president, who I think wanted NATO to basically go away. And this behavior from Putin is showing how very, very, very necessary NATO is. Certainly, NATO is a stronger organization than the United Nations. And so I think it's a very good thing. The more nations, the better.
I would agree at the same time, Stan, but I would caution, two cautions come to mind. First off, what Turkey is doing, our own country has done, other countries have done. We basically politically negotiate agreements, et cetera, to our benefit. And so Turkey's trying to do the same thing, as I understand it. But at the same time, whether Mr. Putin, whatever, agrees with what's going on, I don't think he can control it in a sense if he wants to. What we've seen from our own military evaluation, from our own military evaluating Russia's military, is they can't even maintain what they're doing in Ukraine right now, that Russia is not the old Soviet Union, nor will it be. So if Mr. Putin is saying don't join NATO or this is going to happen, well, he's already crossed the line more than once in what he's doing in Ukraine. So, but the only really danger that some people will say would be that he has nuclear weapons. Well, he's not the only one. And unfortunately, that's that sinful human nature again. Would he release that? What I'm seeing and hearing is that the Russian military would not allow him to do that. That's not going to be some, but again, the caution I would say is we've done the same thing. It's nice. But the second caution, Stan, what happens if someone else in NATO decides to do something that we don't want done or whatever? You know, when you have all these people together, the ideal is that we're all in this together with the same mentality, and we're not. We're there for our own particular reasons. When our reasons become judged as being wrong, then so NATO is wonderful, strong, but again, I would hope it continues, but just with caution.
This week, even more so than NATO, I think we, the world, have to keep our eyes focused on what is happening to those people who were sieged in that steel plant in Mariupol, and to make sure that they are treated decently. I fear for their safety at this point in time. I'm terrified for their safety, and we can't forget them.
Well, I mean, I think that I'm happy to hear of the stance that is being taken toward those nations that want to be included in NATO. I think NATO makes our globe safer. But I wish there was a way to include more African nations. We see that the same thing that's happening in the Ukraine is happening in places like Nigeria, and they're being overlooked. They're not receiving any international aid. So I do think that NATO has made the world better over the past 50 years. I do think that we may want to look at ways that we can protect those nations that are so vulnerable to the assaults from people like Vladimir Putin.
Absolutely.
All right, panel, we've got about 2 minutes left. One more topic, we'll sneak it in. U.S. soccer is leading the way toward pay equity. After a year-long fight for equal pay, U.S. soccer and the women's and men's national teams have announced a historic collective bargaining agreement to close the gender pay gap. U.S. women's national team defender Becky Sauerbrunn said, to be able to say finally equal pay for equal work feels very, very good. So this is a big milestone, panel. Let's hear your thoughts. We've got about a minute and a half. Sorry, it's short.
All I can say is about time.
Yeah, it's about
You
time.
know, and hopefully it will transfer into the workplace for equal pay for women in the workplace and in other types of arenas. I think women historically are paid like 70 cents on the dollar of men. And I think with the soccer, the women's soccer team has actually been more held than the men's soccer team. And so I think it's just something that is overdue. But I also hope that it is something that will translate or transfer to the other areas of our society.
Amen.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see the WNBA have total parity with the NBA, especially after being a season ticket holder for several years and watching the University of Louisville Lady Cardinals. I mean, their basketball is wonderful and on par with anything I've seen, and I look forward to that being hopefully the next step.
That'll be the end of our program. We've run out of time. Thank you to Jamesetta Ferguson, Stan Miles, Daniel Corrie, Shull, and Tony Smith. You can catch this program again on YouTube. Just go online and search for Moral Side of the News. Thank you, panel. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.
Seems like a cliche. People have been saying it about the pandemic. We're all in this together. Well, the crusade is something that we've all been in together for many, many years.
And these amazing machines that saved her life, I just remember seeing WHAS Crusade for Children.
For those of you who contribute to the crusade, just want to personally say thank you. It's helped so many families just like mine. We wouldn't be here without you.
In less than 2 weeks, you can help change a child's life during the 69th annual WHAS Crusade for Children, June 4th and 5th. But you don't have to wait till then. You can donate right now. Just go to WHAScrusade.org. That's WHAScrusade.org to make a secure online donation and see the many ways you can help change a child's life. You can always mail your donation to 520 West Chestnut Street, Louisville, Kentucky 40202. That's 520 West Chestnut Street, Louisville, Kentucky 40202. Thanks for helping change a child's life through the WHAS Crusade for Children. And join us June 4th and 5th for the 69th Annual Crusade.